Welcome to another episode of Genre Art with JB. It's a pleasure to be back with all of you, all 21 of you now. Thank you for subscribing. Remember, if you like the content in this video, please smash that like button or dislike the video for that matter. Dislikes help as well. Any engagement, guys, is better than no engagement at all, right? Help me beat that algorithm. Do me a solid, right? So in any event, back to this painting, right? So this is an update on the painting itself. Today, what I'll be doing is taking you further on my journey across the surface of the planet Calvin here as I paint this image. And I'll also be discussing more, doing more of a deep dive into Isaac Asimov. Getting more into his influences and his influences on me, and also circling back around to Sid Mead, some of the other artists that have influenced me. And speaking of artists that have influenced me, let me just show you guys something. I want to be perfectly transparent about my artistic process here. So typically when I'm working for a client or doing a sci-fi painting from memory here, what I will do is I will mock up a bunch of pastiche of reference images and create sort of a collagified version of what the final illustration will more or less be like compositionally and tonally. And I try to do sort of, keep it semi-accurate to the actual values that will be in the final piece. But that being said, I'm not a slave to the reference, and I definitely change the reference enough to make it my own. So for the character of Beta, I'm definitely going to go with a vastly different costume than the costume here, but I really like the sort of cinnamon sort of cast of the skin in this particular model that was used in the original piece here. So I wanted to sort of bring that into the Beta character that I'm painting. And the original art that I'm referencing off was by the great Hugh Fleming, excuse me. I always get Hugh Fleming and Dave Dorman confused, even though they do have pretty distinctly different styles. But he's a big influence of mine. Another influence of mine is the Dragonlance artist Matt Stawicki. Again, Sid Mead goes without saying in terms of environments is a huge influence on me. Ralph McQuarrie, again, another big influence, and there's elements of all those artists in this reference image here. And people typically say don't use other artists' works as far as for reference, but I feel like that's something that's been going on for hundreds of years, right? Like Da Vinci was referencing off of previous artists that came before him, the classics, right? Ancient Greece, ancient Rome, Michelangelo. The rub is that when you're referencing off of some other artist, you want to try to make it your own, right? So with this facade, for example, I'm changing things up. I'm flipping the script. This is a much more clean facade in the reference here. I'm giving it a little bit more tarnish. I'm giving it a little bit more of a lived-in look, a little bit more grit and grime here. And then I'm also going to up the contrast to match the more high contrast lighting scheme that I have in the background here. There's a bit more haze in mine background than in the initial plate that I'm referencing off of. So those are some things you want to think about when you're referencing. You can reference off photos, and photos are a great resource to reference off of, but you need to be working within a specific stylistic language, and you really need to kind of have an idea of what that language is and carve that artistic lane out for yourself before you really start to heavily rely on referencing from photos in any sort of consistent way. And master studies are a good way to do that, right? So my method of working very much comes out of me initially doing master studies and experimenting with master studies in oil. And my method of working digitally is also informed by how I work in oil, where I would work in layers. The difference is in oil, I'm priming the surface with a gesso, typically a sort of either an ochre or peach color gesso, and then I'm sanding it down. Then I'm using linseed oil or stand oil over a pencil underdrawing with certain areas marked in halftone to prime that surface. And the logic behind that is that you get more smooth edges and a little bit more transparency in certain areas by using the stand oil with the oil paint. And as it's drying, you get a more seamless blending of edges as you go in with your filbert and blend those edges. you really have to time it, you know, you have to do it while it's drying. So that's like sort of the process aspect of oil that you don't have to deal with in digital. But circling back around to the planet Calgon here, this is actually going to be Beta Durrell, sort of like, you know, losing herself into the miasma of foot traffic that's on Calgon, and she's sort of positioned strategically so that she's the subject of the viewer, right? And the front of the book cover, if this were to be a book cover. And then I have my crowd of passersby in the background, and then this sort of like placeholder for a police vehicle is sort of incongruous with everything. I may not include that in the final, just because I feel like it's almost not necessary. It does give a little bit more narrative context. But in any event, we're going to be focusing on this left facade for the most duration of this video. So I wanted to kind of start there. So I think last time that you know, I was talking about Asimov, I talked about the original Foundation Trilogy. I talked about Foundation and Empire being probably my favorite book out of the original trilogy, and they're short books, and there's not a lot of action in them. They mainly deal with conceptual sci-fi themes, you know, very much sort of more concerned with ideas, which is what a lot of the golden age sci-fi works were, as opposed to character and plot. Well, not even so much character. They were more plot focused and more ideas focused, which goes against, like, kind of almost goes against the advice that a lot of modern writers would give you, especially coming out of Hollywood. They tell you to focus on character. But I mean, Asimov, to his credit, makes it work, right? He kind of, like, the ideas sort of are so grand and sort of in scope with regards to what he's talking about that it kind of works. I mean, like, and the characters are compelling enough. At least the protagonists are actually pretty compelling enough, even if they are a little, like, seemingly overpowered, how smart and, like, capable they are. They're compelling enough in their motivations where you buy into it. And you also have to remember, like, that again, the time in which these books came out, very much, you know, they came out of the pulps, really. And the pulps were, you know, they weren't really trying to write the next War and Peace. They were just trying to write a fun yarn, and go over a particular theme. You know, I think in Asimov's case, his themes were, you know, the decline and fall of civilizations, weighty, heavy themes, technology and its importance, and also fighting back against anti-intellectualism. You know, there's a strong commentary on anti-intellectualism in the Foundation books, insofar as the fact that many of the factions that oppose the Foundation are fearful of the Foundation and its technology and its reliance on scientists, and view it as, like, dark magic, right? So that's sort of the rub there. And I'm just looking to see if I like this. I think I do, but I think it needs a little bit of a spot shine.
I didn't get that. Could you try again?
Go with theory. So let me go here. I'm just going to go up here and I'm going to add a little bit of a spot shine to this. So it's a beautiful Sunday out. I hit my mileage goal for the week. 20 miles a week is my mileage goal, and I hit that. And my body is no worse for the wear. So I'm happy about that. I hope you all are enjoying this beautiful Sunday. Yeah. Nah, I don't like that. Undo. And that's the other beautiful thing about digital is you can just undo, right? If you don't like something. Let's knock that back a little bit. Let's get a little bit more haze, maybe. But the idea behind this piece is I wanted a glow. I wanted the piece to have like an ethereal glow to it, like this majestic tropical planet that's the seat of the mule's power, and almost like, you know, a resort planet, right? Like you go here to sort of kick back and escape the hustle and bustle of Trantor, or, you know, sort of like the Costa Rica of space. I can only speak to my own experience in Costa Rica. It was beautiful, beautiful country. Like that. And I'm just kind of playing around here with different, looking at this from different vantage points. I think I want to soften this edge down here. So I typically would do something with my edges where I do something called feathering in Photoshop, where I will select an edge and just feather that edge out. So I'm actually going to do that for this as well. Actually, I'll just do that for this edge here. So I'm just going to go in on this particular layer. We will do filter, or we'll do, filter, blur. And then I can do blur gallery radial blur, or field blur rather. And field blur, see, softens it up quite a bit. That's a little too much, I think. So what I want to do is I want to go in now and I want to modify that blur. So if I go to the top right corner here, and then we click off preview, back on preview. And I actually think it was better at 4 pixels. That looks good to my eye. And then come in here. Crank this opacity up. I usually work with the opacity around 86. Let's go zoom out, view, better. And here too, I think I would blur this edge a little bit. And then we'll just apply that field blur. Of course, we would do the same, around the same for picks. And let's give this some grime, some tarnish over here. Let's give this area a little bit of grit. I'm going to go to my brush settings. But circling back to Asimov, because I keep getting distracted by the by the painting process here. We were talking about the original Foundation Trilogy, and we were talking about how basically Asimov first wrote the Foundation Trilogy in the 50s and 60s. So, and the first Foundation book was actually a series of short stories that he was collected and published as a novel. And the cool thing about the Foundation is that it doesn't cover one character. It covers a series of characters over the course of 1,000 years. And it's a history, really. It's a dramatic history of this organization, this intergalactic federation that is known as the Foundation. Starts out as an organization of scientists and encyclopedists on a distant planet called Terminus. And basically their job is to manage galactic affairs insofar as to prevent galactic civilization from falling apart for 30,000 years. And the whole idea behind the Foundation is that they predict the founder of the Foundation, Harry Seldon, predicts the collapse of the Galactic Empire. And he tells the Emperor, and I think I touched on this last week, that the Empire only has around 300 years of life left in it. And of course, the Emperor hates this and blames Seldon, blames the messenger. How dare you tell me that my empire won't last, right? Typical elite fashion, totally tone deaf and myopic. But Seldon says, no. And so the Emperor threatens to have him arrested, but Seldon says, listen, it's no skin off your back. Why don't you just let me take my scientists and we'll go into exile on this planet Terminus. You won't hear from us. Just let me work on my encyclopedia so that in the event that the Empire does actually collapse, at least people have the sum total of galactic knowledge that's available to them. And basically, he convinces the Emperor by pretending that he's going to work on this encyclopedia to grant him resources, technology, and a facility on Terminus, this planet at the edge of the galaxy. And Seldon goes into what is, in a sense, a self-imposed exile and founds the Foundation. The Foundation, again, just starts out as this planet of encyclopedias. And of course, what the Emperor doesn't know, that Seldon knows, is that he is following a plan, a map, a roadmap of the future that he was able to devise using the mathematical science of psychohistory, which can predict the future when dealing with large groups of people. So all of Seldon's decisions are based on this plan, the Seldon plan that he has concocted, right? And that is like his North Star. So basically, the encyclopedias on Terminus also follow the Seldon plan. And every several decades or so, there's a new crisis that the Foundation has to deal with. And Seldon will appear to the Foundation as a hologram. This is after he's died, of course, in a vault, and tell them how to basically deal with the crisis as per the Seldon plan. And basically, this gives the Foundation the tools to basically hack history. And from that, the Foundation's real goal, which is to become an incubator for the Second Galactic Empire after the Empire collapses, is realized. Now, the other thing that Seldon told the Emperor was that after the Empire collapses, we can prevent the intervening years between the first and a second empire from stretching all the way up to 30,000 years. We can reduce that window down to 1,000 years if we act now. And that's basically the Foundation's express goal, is to get the galaxy through that 1,000-year period between the first and second galactic empire in one piece. So it's a pretty heavy themes that Asimov is dealing with. And Asimov wrote the original novels in the 50s and 60s and then followed up with Foundation's Edge in the early 80s, which kind of expanded the mythology, as I touched on last week. And basically, you find out that, you know, Selden is including Earth in his mythology now and robots. So he brings the robots in with Foundation's Edge, and also the idea of this living planet called Gaia. So that also I thought was pretty cool. That there we go. That's the reference I need. He brings in this idea of the living planet Gaia, and the fact that the mule, the telekinetic or telepathic mutant that almost derails the Foundation and Empire, is actually an exile from the planet Gaia, which is this interconnected living planet. And I thought that was pretty interesting that he brought that all together. And again, some fans hate that, but I actually love it. Select load selection. And then getting back to the mule, that's sort of where we're at right now with this piece. This is the mule's homeworld. This is his throne world, I should say. Let's apply that transformation. And this is going to be more of a video, just me talking about, again, talking about Asimov, and talking about, just talking about the different sort of ways in which Asimov has been a luminary, not just for me, but I think for artists in general. What I want to do is just get this up so I can get a clear read on what's going on here. It looks like if this is the top layer, that there's definitely a little bit of a shift from warm to cool in that reference, which is kind of what I'm going for. So if I go to view actual size here, what I want to do is shift this over. That's the one thing, is keeping, that is the one minus to working in layers, is like keeping everything straight. That's my marble texture. Okay. Let's do a layer here. We'll call this foreground detail. The last thing I do in this piece are going to be the surrounding figures, and I'm going to be finishing off Beta's body there. So what I want to do though is just do maybe come in and find like a light sort of note here. Maybe even come in and do a chalk brush, right? That's what I did for, this is the kind of brush I usually use for faces, is some sort of brush like this. crazy fan of that, but we go up here, select, modify, feather. And then of course we'll go in here. This is at 42. Let's knock that back up to 80. Not bad. I like that. Let's kink this down. And warm colors come forward, cools recede. We want to cool this off a little bit by desaturating it. Let's crank up that reference again. Because we're going to get a little bit of the purple from here in the actual building. It's too much, too much, too much, too much, too much. Like that maybe, right? And then of course what I do is just blend this at the end. And then the other thing we wanted to consider is this sort of cool texture that we have that I would probably, I'm going to throw a multiply filter on. Before I even do that, let me save this. And then I'm going to go up to Beta's layer here, or face layer. And I'm actually just going to erase out a lot of the brown here so I can see what the heck I'm doing. And I'm glad you guys are able to join me today on this beautiful, beautiful Sunday. I'll be doing 2 videos next week as well, again, to make up for the extraordinary lack of content previous weeks. Crank that eraser all the way up to 100. All right. And I'm just going in and just cleaning this up. This underdrawing will actually be a part of the actual finish. I usually like to work the underdrawing into the painting whenever possible. So that looks pretty good. Let me just lock this, save it, go back down to foreground. Now that that is all sorted, what I want to do is I want to do a layer for this patterning here. And this patterning is going to come all the way across. And then I want to come in and do this guardrail. And then we're going to have a little flower garden in the foreground. It'll be nice, little tropical flower garden. We'll base it off of a neutral. In fact, we'll throw this more into a, we'll try and get it into that gray purple key. But a little more on the warm side, maybe. And I also want to investigate what's going on up here with that white barrier. It's kind of cool. No, I think that was just where I cropped the image, but I kind of like, it almost looks like a light shining off of that mass there. So I have a foreground patterning, but what I want to do before I even do that is just figure out what, where my palette is here on this. Building reference, which we don't need since the buildings are all done. I'll just keep that open just because. And if I zoom out, the shapes all bleed into each other. This is actually book cover size. So you don't see it, but what I'm actually doing is taking an actual book cover and sort of measuring out, like kind of looking, okay, like how does this look at book cover scale? I always thought the idea, but getting back again, for the upteenth time getting distracted from Asimov, getting back again to Asimov with regards to Foundation's Edge, I like the idea of this telekinetic planet scale organism. It's a living planet, kind of like Ego, right? Like it's like Ego from the Marvel universe, but less sort of cartoony, like, you know, in the way that it's alive. It's actually there's a psionic network that connects all of the organisms, as opposed to like the planet having telekinetic abilities. But through that psionic network, it can manipulate the course of events. So basically, this is where I'm at right now. I'm going to touch back on this in a little bit. Before I go, what I'll do is I will I'll blend in these forms here. So let me just go to my mixer brush real quick, and then I'll just replay that music there for a sec. And you can see in my mixer brush, this is actually a mixer brush from Ahmed Al-Duri. It's one of his old settings. I'll put his info in the cards. Another great artist there on YouTube. Seems like a pretty solid dude, and you know, provides a lot of good instructional content for aspiring artists. But this was a mixer brush that I found from him that I found very beneficial. And this is a rough round bristle. So, although I don't know why I'm not getting, let's see. Why I'm not getting, that seems to be more like it. I just want to make sure I didn't move anything here. Let me go back. Go to my history. Need to be able to see clearly what I'm doing here. Okay. These are all leftward layers. So I could get away with probably moving this down. Now let's try mixing this thing, this sucker. All right, so that's not gonna work. Let's try doing this. Let's try blurring the edges. First, let me try just doing maybe the smudge tool. And again, using a rough round bristle for that. Seems to work a little better. Let's go back up here to layers. Let's merge these suckers. Now let's try mixing. do layer, or we'll do select, modify, feather, 2, mix. Let's try a different brush. Let's try the this brush, or mixer brush. Looks like it's moving it a little more. Just like I would with oil paint, kind of going in and just moving the mixer brush around. Add a blur to this. Filter. Gaussian blur. Don't want that. View, actual size. Let's view from far away here. Not bad, nice soft shadow. And then let's do filter, Gaussian blur. And then we'll come in along this top edge here. Filter, blur, field blur. And I don't mind that. Let's look at it from actual size though. You always want to step back, just like with a real oil painting. You want to step forward, step back, see how things are jiving. I think 8 pixels is probably better. Probably want to do 4 pixels though, just to make it consistent with the building. Let's check the preview. Actually, we probably want to do maybe more like 6 pixels. View actual size. Not bad. And I'm just thinking. I rather like that. So we'll hit OK. Not bad. And then the last thing I want to do is I want to come in actually and just grab a bit of this right here. Or actually what I want to do is just come in on top of this layer. And grab a little bit of this sort of pink texture. Warm it up a little maybe. Just give it a little bit of a heat, give a little bit of heat to it, you know. Let's check that reference. So you see there's less heat. There's less heat to the piece in the actual reference. Oh. I have to look at it with the reference open. I kind of like it with that extra heat added into it, though. It brings it into a similar color key, which I like. All right, so we'll end it here. Kind of a slow video in terms of painting, I know, but I'm glad that you were able to join me today. And that is about it for now. I will be back with another work in progress on this shortly. Early next week, most likely. So thanks again, guys, for joining me today for another Genre Art with JB. Until next time, have a great week. All right. Talk later.